In the year 2040, humanity had finally planted its flags in the reddish dust of Mars. Led by Elon Musk and SpaceX, the colony, named Aurora Prime, gathered 300 volunteers determined to transform the planet into a new home for our species. The first Martian cycles were celebrated with great enthusiasm. Every day, scientific discoveries and messages of hope were sent back to Earth, inspiring millions who followed the mission online. Everything seemed under control until the geological research team decided to drill into the ice of a newly identified crater, a few kilometers from the colony's main perimeter. The drilling had two clear objectives: to analyze the mineral composition and to search for possible signs of drinkable water. However, the drills ended up revealing something much more intriguing and frightening. There, in deep layers, lay strange organic masses that at first glance appeared to be fossils. The team collected a sample and transported it to the central laboratory, where preliminary analyses confirmed the impossible. They were larvae in a state of cryopreservation. At first, the discovery was met with euphoria by many of the scientists. It would be the definitive proof that life had once existed on Mars, even if only in a remote period of its history. But when a portion of the material was exposed to a pressurized, slightly heated atmosphere, one of the researchers noticed subtle movements under the microscope. Not only was it alive, but it was beginning to show signs of metabolic activity, awakening from a sleep millions of years older than human civilization itself. In the days that followed, worrisome incidents began to accumulate. Technicians complained of severe headaches and auditory hallucinations after passing near the biological research sector. One scientist swore he had seen small shadows crawling inside the ventilation system, though his colleagues attributed it to excessive stress. Even so, security protocols were reinforced and investigations proceeded at a frantic pace. The situation worsened dramatically when 3 employees tasked with collecting new samples at the drilling site failed to return at the agreed time. The search teams found only their empty suits, abandoned in the reddish snow, with no sign of a struggle or an oxygen leak. It appeared as if something or someone had ripped them out of their spacesuits, leaving the garments intact. Panic seized Aurora Prime. Was it hostile Martian fauna, or worse yet, were the larvae discovered just part of a much more complex and deadly life cycle? With communications growing increasingly unstable due to solar storms, the colony felt the weight of an oppressive silence. In corridors lit only by artificial light and in the anxious glances exchanged among its inhabitants, rumors began to spread that something was crawling beneath the surface, taking advantage of the icy tunnels to proliferate. Even in the vastness of the Martian desert, Aurora Prime no longer seemed to have any escape. After all, if the larvae could awaken after all this time, what could stop them from turning humanity's historic achievement into its most terrible nightmare? Chapter 1. Seeds of a Nightmare. Aurora Prime. The colony, established in 2040 under the guidance of Elon Musk and SpaceX, was announced to the world as the first concrete step in humanity's expansion beyond Earth. Located on a vast Martian plain free from the most intense sandstorms, the base housed nearly 500 volunteers, scientists, engineers, doctors, and laborers, all driven by the desire to write a new chapter in the history of humanity. It was a monumental feat. Surviving in that hostile environment required extreme discipline, cutting-edge technology, and above all, the conviction that the effort was worthwhile. The first year on Mars passed without major incidents, considering that the routine itself was extremely arduous. Hydroponic crops yielded encouraging results. Life support systems operated within expected parameters, and solar radiation storms were rigorously monitored. Even the minor mishaps, loose screws, cracks in the pressurized compartments, or communication failures with Earth, ended up as mere footnotes amid the daily achievements. However, everything began to change when a geological exploration team decided to drill deeper in a region near one of Mars's poles in search of possible ice reserves that could be converted into potable water. As the drills advanced into the frozen crust, sensors picked up significant heat anomalies in certain layers. At first, the discovery was met with enthusiasm. If there were an underground heat source, it would mean that the planet might harbor secrets even richer than imagined. Amid the excavations, the geologists encountered something incredibly strange, a whitish formation that, at first glance, resembled a block of milky ice. However, upon isolating the sample and analyzing it in the laboratory, they realized there was something more: tiny capsules, akin to microscopic eggs, embedded within the structure. The commotion was immediate. Until then, science had never found signs of multicellular life on Mars, and this seemed to point to the existence of an ancient ecosystem, or perhaps a type of life hibernating for millennia. In the following weeks, scientific curiosity overcame all caution. Various research departments at Aurora Prime demanded samples to conduct experiments, eager to be the first to understand the phenomenon. The larvae, as they came to be called, were found in a state of complete dormancy, with no apparent metabolic activity. However, even a slight controlled warming was enough to change the scene. In the laboratory, when one of the structures was exposed to a temperature simulated to match that inside the base, they observed slight movements, as if the creature were awakening from a long slumber. As the scientists delved into these discoveries, strange incidents began to occur throughout the colony. Employees reported hearing unusual noises in the air ducts, a constant buzzing that no one could trace. Others claimed to have seen crawling shadows in the corridors late at night, although nothing was ever found on the security cameras. The fear, once just a distant note amid calculated risks, started to spread among the living quarters. As more larvae returned to life in the controlled laboratory environment, rumors multiplied. People whispered about the possibility of a Martian parasite, capable of infesting human bodies or colonizing any space with minimal moisture. The colony's leadership tried to maintain calm, but merely walking down the corridors was enough to feel the oppressive atmosphere, as if the very air froze with each step. And in the silence of the laboratory, beneath the pale light of LED panels, something even more disturbing moved within a sealed tube, living proof that the greatest threat on Mars was not the cold, the radiation, or the scarcity of resources, but rather that which had long lain buried under the ice and was now beginning to awaken. Chapter 2. Echoes of Awakening. The discovery of the Martian larvae profoundly shook the routine at Aurora Prime. In the days following the official announcement, the general feeling was a mix of curiosity and unease. Part of the team felt an almost tangible pride. After all, they had found clear indications of alien life, a milestone never before seen in human history. On the other hand, disturbing rumors circulated that these creatures might represent a real and immediate danger. Still, the colony's leadership, comprised of renowned scientists, experienced engineers, and SpaceX representatives, tried to maintain stability by holding meetings to clarify what was being done in terms of biosafety. In the laboratories, a tense atmosphere hung over every workstation. Research teams worked day and night to decipher the cellular structure of the larvae. The head biologist, Dr. Helen Matthews, led the effort to understand the metabolism of these small life forms. Little was known about them, their resistance to extreme cold, their surprising regenerative ability, and the apparent instinct that made them move toward heat sources. This heat-seeking behavior might be harmless, or it could indicate a dangerous adaptation to exploit more complex organisms like the human body. Meanwhile, outside the labs, the maintenance workers responsible for the pressurized modules began to notice alarming details. Some complained of a strange buzzing sound in the more remote corridors, describing a harsh noise that seemed to echo through the ventilation ducts. Others swore they saw dark shapes, roughly the size of a fist, creeping through the gaps near the air recycling chambers. Initially, it was suspected that there were technical issues with the motion sensors, or even rodents accidentally brought from Earth. A hypothesis soon discarded by security teams, since no type of rat or insect could survive on Mars outside the labs unnoticed. The stories grew even more macabre when one of the research assistants, Marco Dantas, vanished without a trace. The last time he was seen, he was in the biosafety wing of the laboratory, where the larvae were studied in sealed chambers. Security. Camera footage showed Marco entering the containment room, but the system experienced glitches shortly after. When everything returned to normal, only the door remained open, with no sign of him. A thorough search of every sector of the colony ensued, but the assistant had seemingly evaporated. The news spread quickly throughout Aurora Prime, generating panic and dark speculation. Some believed that Marco might have suffered a breakdown and fled to the surface, although there were no records of his exit through the airlock. Others, more inclined to mysticism or pure, unadulterated fear, claimed he had fallen victim to an attack by the larvae. This rumor gained strength when one technician mentioned seeing a living stain oozing through the ventilation ducts that very night. Feeling the tension mounting, the colony's high command met urgently. Present were Dr. Matthews, Chief Engineer Yuri Anderson, Head of Security Brennan Solomon, and the General Administrator, Dr. Letitia Turner. The agenda was clear: to decide how to proceed in the face of the possibility that the larvae were multiplying and escaping their laboratory containment. Heated discussions ensued. Matthews insisted on further studies before taking drastic measures arguing that incinerating the samples would mean losing the greatest biological discovery of all time. In contrast, Solomon and Anderson argued that there was no option but to destroy any contamination foci, for fear of endangering all the lives in the colony. In the end, a compromise was reached. Some larvae would be kept in maximum isolation, while security around the lab was reinforced, and a complete sweep of the ventilation and water conduit systems was initiated to ensure that no specimen was loose. As armed security officers patrolled the more remote passages, Dr. Matthews and her team dove into genetic analyses, racing against time to uncover the workings of the alien organism. A grim mood transformed every corridor of Aurora Prime into a stage for fears and whispered secrets. Where conversations once revolved around hydroponic crops and solar radiation reports, now they spoke of creeping beings and possible silent attacks. Sleeping became more difficult. Even eating turned into a joyless act. Amid this growing terror, many wondered if the decision to risk everything in the name of research was, in fact, a death sentence for the entire colony. For with each step taken, it became increasingly clear that something was moving in the shadows, and that this unknown life might have no intention of coexisting peacefully with humans. Chapter 3. Signs of Ruin. The routine at Aurora Prime began to revolve around two main objectives: finding Marco Dantas and eradicating any chance of the larvae infesting the colony further. Chief Engineer Yuri Anderson initiated a complete sweep of the ventilation systems, deploying teams armed with motion detectors and thermal cameras in search of abnormal heat sources. However, the vast labyrinth of ducts and cables made the task seem endless. Every corridor revealed only the metallic echo of footsteps and an unsettling sense that something was moving just beyond reach. Meanwhile, Dr. Helen Matthews was getting increasingly worrisome results in her laboratory. Advanced DNA analyses of the larvae indicated exceptional biological plasticity. They seemed capable of adapting rapidly to changes in temperature and pressure, suggesting they could thrive not only in the frozen Martian soil, but also in artificially heated environments such as the colony's modules. Despite her concerns, Helen refused to succumb to despair. She still believed it was possible to understand the life cycle of these creatures before they spread completely. At the same time, psychological tension was mounting among the colonists. Rumors about creeping beings circulated during mealtimes, fueling everyone's imagination. Some swore they heard stifled screams during the early morning hours, although the security systems registered nothing significant. Others suspected that someone in the colony, perhaps obsessed with the research, might be sabotaging the searches to allow the larvae to spread. Mutual distrust began to settle in even the most unexpected places, turning every interaction into a nerve-wracking test. In the security sector, Head Brennan Solomon assigned constant patrols to the less frequented corridors, where lighting was scarce and the sense of claustrophobia reached its peak. These patrols, made up of 2 or 3 agents, moved cautiously along curved walls with their flashlights. The air, already thin due to the Martian atmosphere, felt heavier than ever, making each breath a reminder of the danger lurking in every corner. During one such patrol, agents Ricardo Vasconcelos and Pilar Romero picked up a faint heat signature, coming from a section reserved for medical supplies storage. The area was locked and silent, but a quick check of the records revealed that the door had been opened and closed about 20 minutes earlier, without any employee logging into the system. When they forced the door open, they were met with an unsettling scene. Overturned boxes on the floor, scattered gauze packages, and a trail of viscous liquid leading to a metal wall. The trail abruptly ended, as if absorbed by some invisible crevice. As they examined the area, Vasconcelos noticed a high-pitched sound, almost like a hiss, coming from the darkest corner. When he shone his flashlight there, he saw something move, a formless shape about the size of a cat that quickly hid behind a container. Pilar tried to contact security, but the radio only emitted static. There was no signal. Suddenly, a metallic flash filled the area, and the two agents heard what sounded like a whisper, a nearly human vocalization but with no recognizable words. Vasconcelos moved forward to get a better look, but the creature vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind only a trail of mottled slime. The news of the incident spread through the colony within minutes, intensifying the panic. Now, there was proof that the larvae were not only alive and active, but also growing and possibly developing complex motor functions. The threat was no longer hypothetical. By the end of the day, the leaders of Aurora Prime gathered once more to discuss the gravity of the situation. Dr. Letitia Turner, the general administrator, demanded extreme measures. If it meant sealing off or even abandoning entire sectors to contain the infestation. So be it. The idea of evacuating the colony was brought up, but the breakdown in communications with Earth due to solar storms rendered any rescue request impossible for an indefinite time. In just over a year, Aurora Prime had transformed from an interplanetary dream into a growing nightmare. With every dark corridor, every burst of static on the radio, and every distorted shadow, it became increasingly clear that which lay dormant beneath the Martian ice would not hesitate to transform the colony into its new habitat, no matter the cost. Chapter 4: Internal Siege. The red alert triggered by Marco Dantas's disappearance and the reports of creatures in the corridors set off a series of drastic measures at Aurora Prime. All non-essential sections were sealed off, and the circulation of personnel was reduced to the absolute minimum. Almost immediately, complaints of claustrophobia and anxiety emerged, as colonists found themselves confined to specific areas, unable to roam freely throughout the complex. The fear that the larvae might be hiding in any air duct or behind any wall fueled an atmosphere of collective paranoia. In the main laboratory, Dr. Helena Matthews and her team found themselves in an ethical impasse. On one side, some scientists pleaded for more time to deepen their studies and understand the larvae's physiology. On the other, there were those who advocated the immediate destruction of all samples, speculating that these beings might evolve into even deadlier forms. Matthews tried to keep a clear head, reminding everyone that without understanding the origin and life cycle of these creatures, it was impossible to deal with them effectively. Yet even she could not deny that the situation had spiraled out of control. As the scientific debates raged, maintenance engineer Luana Carter led a repair team to reinforce the security of the modules. They fixed faulty electronic locks, installed additional motion sensors, and sealed off secondary access points that could serve as pathways for the larvae. Some team members reported bizarre incidents. In isolated corridors, indistinct whispers were heard, and lights flickered for no apparent reason. Constant emergency calls came in that, upon verification, turned out to be false alarms, or perhaps ominous premonitions of what was to come. In the medical wing, Dr. Jonathan Reed attended to the first cases of injuries related to the attacks. The wounds were not severe, superficial cuts and abrasions that, according to patients, appeared during brief encounters with something crawling in the corners. Descriptions varied. Some spoke of a formless mass with tiny tentacles, others of a pointed insect about the size of a small reptile. Regardless of the variations, one fact remained constant. That thing moved intelligently, choosing the exact moments to flee or strike. Meanwhile, head of security Brennan Solomon began intensified patrols. Yet even the thermal detection equipment proved insufficient to track the creatures, which seemed to master the labyrinthine architecture of Aurora Prime. Workers and security. Personnel reported glimpses of scaly silhouettes sneaking through the corners. More troubling were the occasions when, upon engaging what they believed to be a target, they only found a trail of viscous residue, as if the larvae had vanished within the very walls. Trapped between Mars' inhospitable surface and an unknown predator, the colonists felt the tension reach its peak. Any noise from above sent shudders through them. Any crackle on the radio made their blood run cold. Even the cafeteria, once a place of camaraderie, had turned into a space of silence and fearful glances. Over cups of reheated coffee, some even spoke of the extreme possibility of a sacrifice, evacuating only the lucky few who could survive, and then blowing up the modules of Aurora Prime to eradicate the infestation. Yet General Administrator Leticia Turner hesitated to take such a drastic risk. After all, that would mean declaring the complete failure of the Martian project and, potentially, sacrificing dedicated researchers who might yet turn the tide. The sense of helplessness was suffocating. As the crisis deepened, each colonist began to wonder how many lives would be needed to appease the nightmare they had awakened in the red heart of Mars, and above all, how much time remained before the larvae would claim Aurora Prime entirely. Chapter 5: Marks in the Darkness. Emergency lights still flickered in some corridors of Aurora Prime, giving the environment the appearance of a gloomy maze. After days of unrelenting confinement and tension, the morale of the colonists plummeted. To maintain an illusion of control, General Administrator Leticia Turner instituted diurnal and nocturnal vigilance shifts in each critical sector: air supply centers, cultivation modules, laboratories, and especially the biosafety wing. Yet, most people recognized the harsh truth. There was not enough personnel to cover every point of the colony at the same time. The larvae could be anywhere, and that feeling of insecurity only grew stronger. While Dr. Helena Matthews fought for answers in the central laboratory, trying to comprehend every fragment of the alien DNA, a strange phenomenon began to be reported by various colonists. Iridescent stains appeared in the dampest corners, as if the condensation accumulating on the habitat's fuselage was being altered by some living substance. Maintenance technicians led by Luana Carter even collected samples of these stains for analysis. The preliminary result was frightening. Under the microscope, they observed microorganisms that seemed genetically related to the larvae, yet infinitely smaller, like a primary larval form or spores capable of spreading through the system's fluids. This alarming discovery led to the temporary shutdown of some recycled water pipelines, which further aggravated everyone's discomfort. Showers were strictly regulated, and access to potable water became restricted. The already heavy atmosphere turned nearly chaotic when, during one Martian night, an ear-splitting crash was heard in the southern wing. A set of reinforced walls had collapsed, releasing a cloud of reddish dust into a pressurized corridor. When Head of Security Brennan Solomon and his men arrived on the scene, they discovered that the collapse had been caused by internal damage, as if something had corroded the metal structure from the inside out. Brown, viscous cracks covered the beams, and amid the debris, they noticed that part of the material had dissolved into a sort of sludge. Engineer Luana, examining the damage more closely, observed extremely fine channels carved along the steel, resembling tiny tunnels, confirming the suspicion that the larvae were evolving, now capable of excreting a corrosive substance or adapting to the metal of the walls. The rescue operation, in addition to being exhausting, revealed yet another mystery. Amid the rubble, they found the badge of Marco Dantas, the missing researcher. No one knew how the object ended up there, given that the man had vanished in a completely different sector. With every new fragment of information, the plot grew denser and more perverse. Microscopic beings reproducing in water systems, adult creatures corroding metals, and now the possibility that they were moving freely between completely isolated areas. As teams tried to contain the damage, panic became almost palpable. Distorted voices echoed through the communicators, demanding immediate answers. Some colonists, overwhelmed by despair, spoke of open revolt against the leadership, accusing them of putting the entire colony at risk in the name of scientific advancement. Others retreated into denial, preferring to lock themselves in their quarters and pray that the threat would vanish on its own. Faced with this grim scenario, General Administrator Turner decided to convene an emergency meeting of all researchers, security officers, and key engineers in the main auditorium. The goal was to discuss extreme measures such as detonating demolition charges in infected areas. Even Dr. Matthews, once a fervent advocate for further study, was beginning to yield to the mounting pressure, fearing that a simple explosion might not be enough to contain something so resilient. In the midst of heated debates, a new alert sounded over the loudspeakers. A massive sandstorm was imminent. This meant that reinforcements, or any attempt at evacuation, would be impossible for the next few hours, perhaps even days. Isolated, in the heart of Mars, without communication with Earth and surrounded by an ever-growing threat, the colonists felt the noose tightening inexorably. And worst of all, there was the chilling certainty in every gaze. The larvae would not stop there. Chapter 6. Labyrinth of Silences. The doors of the main auditorium slammed shut in front of exhausted, despair-marked faces. The proposal to explode contaminated sectors in order to contain the larvae had sparked a fierce verbal battle between Aurora Prime's leaders and the scientific wing led by Dr. Helena Matthews. A group of colonists, fearing that time to act was running out, clamored for immediate action, even if it meant compromising the entire colony's structure. Matthews, although worried, still argued that they did not know enough about these creatures. An explosion might disperse even more spores, worsening the problem. But the debate was interrupted by the unmistakable roar of one of the external airlocks. The approaching sandstorm slammed into the colony with such violence that the containment structures shuddered as if made of paper. Through the observation windows, only darkness immersed in reddish particles could be seen. An oppressive blackness took over the world outside, and within the corridors, a low, growing vibration seemed to alternate between a distant roar and a sinister lament. Then the lights failed completely in most modules, triggering a silent chaos. Communicators emitted static, automatic doors jammed, and oxygen levels began fluctuating in the more vulnerable sectors. Chief Engineer Yuri Anderson, accompanied by 3 technicians, rushed to the auxiliary control room, a backup area designed for severe emergencies. There they discovered that the sandstorm had caused an electrical overload, impairing several vital systems. The red dust storm, combined with the already precarious internal situation, created an apocalyptic scene. With communications unreliable, head of security, Brennan Solomon improvised a patrol system using flashlights and portable ultrasonic devices in hopes of detecting any abnormal movement. But the darkness only amplified the terror. Creeping noises emerged in empty corridors, stifled screams echoed, and when teams arrived at a location, they found only scratch marks and pools of a viscous liquid that seemed to slowly devour the metal. Everyone began to suspect that the larvae, or the form they had assumed, were exploiting the blackout to their advantage, moving effortlessly through ducts and passages previously ignored. In the central laboratory, Dr. Matthews and maintenance, engineer Luana Carter struggled to keep some emergency generators active to sustain the research incubators where isolated samples of the larvae still lay. Those small life forms started to stir when exposed to the heat generated by the devices, as if reacting to human panic. On the verge of an emotional collapse, Dr. Matthews made frantic notes. Parts of the alien organism appeared to merge into larger colonies, capable of piercing and corroding metal surfaces. They were not merely slightly aggressive insects, but possibly organisms acting in unison, a collective intelligence expanding into the dark recesses of Aurora Prime. Tension escalated further when a message broke through the emergency loudspeaker's static. It was the muffled voice of someone, apparently within a duct, calling for help in desperate whispers. They spoke of living corridors, where the walls seemed to pulse and drip a dark substance. Despite their best efforts, the origin of the call could not be traced. It was as if the warning came from within a shared nightmare, scratching at the already shattered minds of the colonists. With the storm roaring outside and the larvae advancing in the shadows, Aurora Prime took on the air of a mausoleum. Every step intensified the feeling of claustrophobia. The emergency lights, when functional, seemed only to illuminate ghostly specters of fear. The colonists avoided meeting each other's eyes, afraid of reflecting their own despair. And as the red dust danced outside, the colony finally understood the magnitude of its error. What had begun as a glorious adventure toward humanity's future on Mars was now transforming into an anguished requiem, where every breath and every tremor could seal their fate. Chapter 7. A light in the abyss. Chaos at Aurora Prime had reached an unbearable boiling point. The storm outside continued to roar, and access to the outer areas was virtually blocked by debris and the red sand accumulating in the exit tunnels. Inside, the partial blackout persisted while the larvae advanced unchecked, exploring once safe corridors and leaving slimy trails in every corner. For the colonists, each minute in the dimness was torture, as piercing sounds, fleeting visions, and bursts of static on the communication systems formed a macabre chorus, a reminder that there was no easy escape. Engineer Luana Carter, accompanied by 2 exhausted technicians, pressed on with the mission to reactivate strategic sections of power while isolating sectors dominated by the creatures. To do so, she used a specialized cutting tool, sealing passages with reinforced steel plates. Her heart pounded with every spark from the torches, fearing that the bright flash might attract the swarm. She felt that time was running out. Each sacrificed sector left dozens of vital pieces of equipment inaccessible, further reducing the colony's chances of survival. At the same time, Dr. Matthews remained obsessed with understanding the larvae's biochemical structure. Isolated in one of the few laboratories still intact, she and her team had managed to isolate an adult specimen, a creature nearly the size of a dog, with firm tentacles and a scaly exoskeleton that periodically contracted, expelling fluids. Behind the safety glass, the creature seemed to study them with dark, unblinking eyes, as if analyzing every detail of its surroundings. The doctor noted that whenever someone got too close, the creature emitted a series of clicks, almost like a call. The idea that they might be communicating among themselves on a level they still couldn't comprehend was simply terrifying. Amid this atmosphere of growing dread, head of security, Brennan Solomon set up a small makeshift command post. There, amidst emergency lights and unstable monitors, he tried to reorganize the search for the missing. Several people were still unaccounted for, and the case of Marco Dantas remained shrouded in mystery. With no concrete clues, some wondered if he had been taken by the larvae, perhaps serving as a host or source of nourishment. This possibility grew ever more real as new reports emerged about the bodies of small experimental animals being found, without internal organs, as if something had devoured them from the inside out. Then came another blow. A tiny thread of hope ignited when a faint transmission cut through the static over the cafeteria's speakers. The voice was unclear, but recognizable syllables of panic could be made out calling for help. It was impossible to determine the exact origin, but it seemed to come from an advanced research module that had been sealed days before due to a critical infestation. If someone were still alive inside, it meant there might be a way to reverse or at least slow the creature's advance. Gathering what little courage remained, Solomon, Dr. Matthews, and Engineer Carter decided to form a rescue team, a small group that would attempt to reach the research module, forging a path through darkened sectors and tunnels likely infested with larvae. With each step, they had to breach blockades, navigate around corroded walls, and face the terror of confronting the unknown in total darkness. Still, the possibility of saving lives, or finding a definitive clue to contain the threat, overpowered the fear that haunted them. As they advanced, the silence of the corridors weighed like a death sentence, punctuated only by the continuous rumble of the storm outside. The feeling of being watched was almost physical, as if pairs of eyes were hidden in every junction of cables. None of them knew whether that glimmer of hope they sought might actually be a trap, but there was no turning back now. Either they would find a way to restore some order to Aurora Prime, or they would be swallowed, both literally and figuratively, by what had been awakened in Mars' depths. Chapter 8. Cries in the Red Silence. The rescue team pressed through the devastated corridors, with every step feeling as if the thinning air and encroaching cold were seeping into the corroded walls. Dr. Matthews led the group, alternating, her gaze between the heat monitor and the shadows that seemed to pulse in the corners. Engineer Luana Carter sweat profusely as she balanced her torch and spare batteries, while Brennan Solomon advanced with his weapon drawn, trying to hide the terror etched on his face. The other members, 2 security technicians, stuck to the rear, terrified that at any moment something might emerge from the metal voids. Their final destination was the advanced research module, sealed off days before. The group moved among darkened walls where streaks of slime glistened in the faint light of their flashlights. At every turn, heat sensors registered brief, erratic readings, as if small bands of creatures were moving quickly, always just out of sight. The silence was occasionally broken by trembling sighs or bursts of static over the radios. The world outside, or what remained of it, seemed more distant than ever, choked by the raging sandstorm. When they finally reached the module's airlock, they found it partially corroded. They needed a cutting charge to force it open. On the other side awaited a desolate scene. Upturned tables, shattered equipment, and metal panels covered with that iridescent sludge shining in violaceous hues. At the far end of the hall, emergency lights flickered feebly, and next to a toppled console lay the remnants of a spacesuit, its legs twisted unnaturally. They recognized the name embossed on it. It belonged to a researcher who had disappeared weeks earlier. No sign of life was evident. No body was found, only the empty husk of the uniform. Solomon called out over the radio in search of the voice that had called for help, but received only a stifling hiss in response. The technicians swept the area with their flashlights, until Dr. Matthews heard a faint groan. There, slumped against a half-open hatch, they found Marco Dantas. He trembled uncontrollably, his eyes swollen with terror and his face covered in wounds. He seemed to murmur incoherent phrases, his lips damaged by frantic bites. Upon seeing the group, he attempted to speak but could only cough up a mixture of blood and dark secretion. Clutched to his chest was a curious device, resembling a modified tablet displaying frantic readings of the larvae, as if he had been studying them until his final moment. They tried to help him, but Marco let out a piercing cry. His neck's skin was inflamed and exhibited strange movements, as if something alive was pulsing within it. In a moment of lucidity, he raised his gaze to Dr. Matthews and whispered a single word that no one understood, before falling lifelessly. Whatever had been growing within him finally broke free, bursting through his neck in a horrific explosion. A hideous creature, with thin tentacles and eyes glinting with hatred, leaped into the shadows amid sprays of blood, vanishing before anyone could react. That was the breaking point. In panic, one of the technicians fired at the creature's trail, but the bullet ricocheted, striking a pressurized pipe. The pipe burst, releasing a cloud of extremely flammable gas. Dr. Matthews and Luana Carter screamed for everyone to evacuate, but it was already too late. A spark from the torch came into contact with the gas and the entire module shuddered violently. Within seconds, An explosion resounded, sending the ceiling crashing down and hurling colonists against the walls. Pieces of metal and shards of glass flew in every direction. Amid the chaos, Dr. Matthews felt the world spinning. Her ears rang as she searched desperately for Luana and Brennan in the whirlwind of dust and smoke. Coughing, blood, and screams merged together, echoing within the confined chamber. Her blurred vision caught sight of an open fissure in the external wall, allowing a glacial gust filled with Martian sand to rush in. In a fleeting glimpse, she saw Brennan sprawled motionless on the ground and could not determine where Luana had fallen. There was still movement around her, and it was not human. Formless silhouettes seemed to rise behind debris illuminated by intermittent flames. The explosion did not remain confined to the module. It reverberated throughout the complex, destabilizing other sectors. Emergency doors jammed or swung open uncontrollably, and the entire colony groaned in agony like a dying organism. As internal structures collapsed, the fierce storm outside began to invade, hurling clouds of sand that mingled with fire and the viscous slime that dripped through the corridors. Dr. Matthews tried to drag Brennan's lifeless body, but her vision darkened and her legs faltered. She realized she would lose consciousness at any moment. As the air grew thinner, she felt something crawling toward her, cold tentacles brushing against her boot.